Here's this week's Steam Code raffle winner. I give a Steam Code for a free game away with every video I do, and all you have to do to enter is leave a comment that wouldn't violate Twitter's terms of service. Make sure you have contact info in your YouTube profile so I can reach out to you. A complete list of games to choose from is in the description below. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a chance to win. Now on with the show. I'm playing something almost every week, and sometimes I want to talk about it and give you a vertical slice. So stick with me for some lightning reviews. This week on the chopping block. This week I've been playing the 2005 version of Resident Evil 4. Seeing that there was a remake coming out, and wanting to refresh myself from my playthrough on the PS2 I did well over a decade ago, I decided to throw in my PS4 version, relive the magic, and have a basis of comparison on how the 2023 rendition stands up. Before I go into more detail, let me put front and center that I am a casual Resident Evil fan. While I've collected almost every single entry in the series in one form or another, I've only played to completion about 3 to 4 titles, including 4. The others, I believe, would be the remake of 1 on the GameCube, as well as the GameCube port of 2, and Resident Evil 5 in co-op on the Xbox 360. I also spent about 5 minutes each with Resident Evil Dead, Aim, and Gaiden, and I don't think I care for more. So it's quite fair to say I've seen a nice cross-section of what the series has to offer. That being said, Resident Evil 4 is definitely on the higher end of the spectrum in terms of quality. Historically, it was the first Resident Evil to do away with the fixed camera tank controls that were iconic to the franchise thus far. That's not saying 4's movement was rapid and fluid. It's still fair to say that Leon Kennedy moves like a tank when you start playing the game. The main shift being the over-the-shoulder perspective for when you enter combat, and it gives you a much more direct impact on the damage dealt. However, the other major shift in the franchise that I ended up loving more than most other elements was the tone of the story and the characters.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
Resident Evil had always been a bit absurd, and certain elements came across as unintentionally campy or amusing.
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
But it was always more immersed in its horror element, the goal usually being to survive an onslaught of undead enemies and overgrown mutant creatures. Resident Evil 4 represented a major shift into action to match the horror, and with it came an intentionally campy tone, led by Leon, the biggest dork trying to come across as an action movie hero, slinging out one-liners and carrying himself with an arrogant confidence that would normally have been smacked out of him the first time he took a pitchfork to the torso.
Don't fall for this old trick.
The action movie absurdity also arrives in the set pieces such as fighting giants in a volcano and outrunning a 4-story tall marble automaton. And of course, let's not forget the iconic merchant who is mysteriously omnipresent.
Thank you.
But let's not ignore the horror. There were still moments that left me immensely nervous, primarily with the sound design, and I was incredibly hesitant to keep playing when I got to the stage with the regenerating enemies that you can only defeat regularly if you've managed to get an infrared scope for one of your guns. Given the inventory management and your own individual playstyle, you may not even have that gun because your stockpile has to be managed immaculately with what I would argue is a bonus minigame. The attaché case ensures that you always have to know what you have and dictates the level of caution you need to proceed with and how risky you need to be with your playstyle to ensure you're going to be able to make it through the next fight. In fact, with the usual mentality of survival horror, sometimes fight all in all just aren't worth it. There were a few moments where I was running low on ammo, so instead of killing all the enemies in front of me, I'd throw a flashbang grenade and simply run through. In fact, the combat at times was the most difficult challenge. It heavily incentivized observation and anticipation of what you were going to encounter, given that the tank controls and stop-and-pop nature of your ability to shoot make close-quarters combat and crowds immensely dangerous. It's worth noting that in moments you were feeling confident enough with the combat or were able to anticipate a situation well enough, you could enable hilarious slapstick moments or cheese the enemies to make it so that your resources were managed very easily. Unfortunately, that's also where the game grows most frustrating, because every once in a while the game will intentionally bombard you with enemies at close range. It's not impossible to get through these segments, but you're usually going to have to trial and error some stuff. This isn't aided by the fact that some enemies come across as cheap with instant death attacks. In fact, there were some instances of the game where I just screamed for the game to outright off at that shit. Another annoyance is present in one of the characters, Ashley.
Help me, Leon!
You're ostensibly there to save her, being the president's daughter, but there are times when she's portrayed that make me feel she should have just been a plot MacGuffin rather than the subject of prolonged escort segments. The level that you play as her is reasonably tense, and it was a nice breakup of pace, but otherwise I challenge people to bring forth a game that had an escort quest that didn't end up being annoying in some aspect. Speaking of design elements worthy of questioning, let's talk about Resident Evil 4's QuickTime events. I don't have much of a personal opinion one way or the other on them, other than the following statement. If you're going to do QuickTime events, they need to be a core element of the game's overall design, and Resident Evil 4 does feature them more than most. Given the fact that QuickTime events are sort of going the way of the dodo with most modern game design, I think this is more deserving of a discussion in and of itself. Resident Evil 4 is commonly cited as one of the greatest games of all time. Thinking about it at length, I don't like this phrase. I would personally use the phrase, one of the greatest of its time. Games and game design are constantly evolving, learning, adapting ideas pioneered by others, and laying new foundations for others to do the same. Saying that something is the greatest of all time implies that it can't be improved upon. Resident Evil 4 certainly holds up as being enjoyable, challenging, and given the most recent trend of remaking the mainstay Resident Evil titles of yesteryear, I see the rationale for Capcom's higher-ups to make some money. However, given how much I did still enjoy it in spite of its annoyances that popped up along the way, I'm not certain the remake is going to be necessary. Given that I'm just about to dive into the remake to come back with next week, here's hoping that I don't burn myself on Resident Evil for a while. Now, if you'll excuse me, the installation of the remake is almost complete. Hey, look at that, it's the end of the video. Don't forget to subscribe, and remember that commenting can actually win you a free prize. So until next time, this is Gheeotine saying thanks for watching and keep your head on your shoulders.